In the revelation that commanded Joseph Smith and the saints in New York to move to the Ohio, they were promised that here they would receive the law and the endowment of power from on high. Just 5 days after Joseph Smith arrives in Kirtland, Ohio, he calls a meeting of 12 elders of the church. It may have been in the schoolhouse here at the Morley farm or somewhere around the Whitney store in Kirtland. Wherever they assembled, we know that they asked 5 questions. As they asked their 5 questions, each in turn, they would pray, and Joseph Smith would dictate a revelation. They were compiled into what we know today as section 42 of the Doctrine and Covenants, the section we're studying this week in Come Follow Me. Section 42 is called the law in the manuscripts. Oftentimes we call it the law of consecration. The problem with calling it just the law of consecration is that the law was intended to be more expansive than that. It was a law that was intended to govern the church in many ways, and the law of consecration is just one section of the 5 that were contained within the revelation. The first question that they asked was whether or not the saints who were gathering from New York to Ohio should be established as a separate community, or if the 2 communities of saints should gather together as one. The answer that the Lord gives is that they should be gathered together as one, but that the gospel should be preached throughout the world. The second question that the elders asked that day concerned regulations in the church. First, they wanted to know how meetings should be run and who had rights to revelation on behalf of the saints. The Lord's answer to the saints in Ohio was identical to his answer to the saints in New York. There was one person, Joseph Smith, and his successors, who would have the ability to receive revelation on behalf of the whole church. The third concern of the elders that day was in regard to their families while they were preaching. They knew that they would be called, as others had, to leave home and family and to preach the gospel as they went. They were told that if they went and faithfully fulfilled those missions, that their families would be cared for by the church. The fourth question that the elders asked that day concerned what the relationship between the church and the world should be. They were particularly concerned about indebtedness to others. The Lord's simple answer was to avoid debt. The final question they asked that day concerned the gathering of the saints from New York. They knew that in order to accommodate that influx of new people, they would have to provide places for them to live and possibly places for them to work. Joseph Smith came into a situation where many of the converts were already part of groups such as the family, a group that lived here at the Morley farm, who were living in relationships where they no longer had personal property. They were living together in shared communities. While Joseph Smith believed that the family was sincere in their attempt to follow God, he believed that their interpretation of the New Testament and their application of those principles was in error. As a result, they asked the Lord how they should accommodate those needs. And one of the most important things that grows out of this revelation is new responsibilities for the bishop. Edward Partridge was called as bishop just 5 days earlier. It's the first time that that priesthood office is mentioned in any of the records of the church. They knew nothing on that day about what a bishop should do. Here they find the first thing that he should do. He's to be concerned with the temporal welfare of the saints. They're to consecrate their properties to him, to give over their willing sacrifices to the Lord, to provide for the temporal needs of the church and of the poor among the membership. Bishop Partridge is given responsibility for making sure that those stewardships are cared for in an appropriate way.